Asad runs a company called the Unmistakable, and it's a consultancy made up of minorities. And the company is making organizations and campaigns that are more representative towards the modern society, both inside and out. With the work, and he works with companies like the England Cricket Board, Barnardo's, Openreach, Unilever. He was previously the director of communications for Pride in London, which must have been a big organizational thing. And he's held very senior positions in a number of marketing and communication agencies. So I would love to bring Asad here on the camera. If we can get him up here, that's great. Welcome, Asad, and I will hand it over to you. You have basically 20 minutes, so good luck.
20 minutes. Thank you for having me. And so, as mentioned, I run a consultancy called The Unmistakable, and the work that we do is about creating more inclusion and less confusion. I think we could all agree we're living in a time, and if you're sat in the UK, a very rainy and wet UK, the level of confusion that we have right now around who is in which government position, what might the economy look like in a week, in a month, in a couple of months, in a year, what will the world of work look like, all feels quite confusing right now. And at the core of that, we look at, well, how can we dispel and clear out some of that? And what does that look like when you apply the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion? So the question that I always ask to people that I'm speaking to is, well, how confident do you feel when it comes to applying equity, diversity, and inclusion into what you do? And the what you do bit here is really important, because I think people understand the terms and the concepts of ED&I, and I know that there have been speakers today who have talked about what the diversity part means, what equity, equality, and inclusion means, but actually, when it comes to applying it into the day-to-day, whether that's who you're hiring, how you're leading, what you're creating, what you're building, what you're selling, that's the hard part, and that's the bit that can feel really confusing, because not only are these different ways of operating, but also we can get it wrong. And that ability to get things wrong is heightened today through the sense of being cancelled, the culture wars. And so just thinking about that number of where you might be from 1 to 10, many of you here might be, well, I'm an 8 to 10, and this is going to be a good refresher talk. If you're somewhere between the 5 to 6, I'm hoping there's something in here that will move you up 1 or 2 notches. And if you're down at a 1 or 2, then don't worry, we'll take it easy. But there should be a way to move up in there. So what I'm going to center the next 15 minutes, I can see the clock ticking around, is 4 questions, which is, where are we at with ED&I today? How are organizations adapting? What is needed on the inside when it comes to who you are in your business, and what could it look like on the outside when it comes to brand and marketing? And as you heard, that's what we do. We look at inside out, the whole mechanism and organizational ecosystem. So to touch on where we're at with ED&I today, well, the first thing is that we've all got to be the I in D&I. Oftentimes people think, well, EDI is for someone over there. It's for someone whose job role it is, or it's perhaps someone in HR or someone in the people team, and it's not really for me. But actually, it is for everybody, because this is about a big societal shift and a big awareness raise that's happened over the past couple of years. And what we've seen in those couple of years is that we're in a state of diversity and confusion. This state of, well, what are we meant to do, and might I get it wrong, and how do I apply this into supply chain management, or how might I apply this into marketing? It's making people think, well, what do I do? But fundamentally, it's about people. It's about how we as people and humans are evolving and changing. And suddenly we've got language around this. Suddenly we've got the information that we didn't have before to start to talk about these changes and these facets of what make us who we are. Now, when we talk about who we are, I think language matters a lot. And we hear a lot around the word diverse. So we hear people saying, well, we've got to hire more diverse candidates, or we need to hire for diversity, or we need to be more diverse. And actually, one person cannot be diverse. I've often been told, well, you know, you're a diverse person. What does that look and feel like? But I can't be, because the very definition of diversity means you need more than one. You need a plurality of individuals. And that in and of itself gives you a sense of where some of the confusion might be coming from, because we're using this language of be more diverse, but are we necessarily qualifying and quantifying it and really saying what we mean? So are we saying, well, we really want to be a better workplace for people with disabilities? Or are we saying that we want to be a better workplace for people who have experienced racism, or we want to be anti-racist? Getting more granular in the terms can help to dispel some of the confusion. What can also make people confused is this sense that it is for someone and not someone else. So diversity and confusion is the name of the research report that we launched last year and will be launching again next year. And we looked at, do people feel included when it comes to conversations around ED&I in the workplace? And we found that actually over a quarter of people feel excluded, which is quite fascinating, in saying, well, if a quarter of my workforce don't feel like they can get involved in something, then why is that? And then when you drill into by age, we find that younger people feel more excluded than older people, and Black and mixed race and Asian British people feel more excluded than white people. Now, that finding in and of itself does present a bit of surprise, and it suggests that either people are tired of having conversations and taking themselves out, or might not feel safe to go into the conversation because they're not sure what that means and what burden that might place on someone. So holding that context to say, well, why do we feel that way? And what are we going to do about it to create cohesive workplaces is something that we're seeing a lot of organizations look to do. So if I talk about how organizations are responding, they're responding through apologies, adjustments, and as you'd expect, actions. I think everyone here will know that there's been such an outpouring of money and funds and promises that came off the back of George Floyd's murder. There have been a number of different moments that have happened over the last few years where organizations have responded, but really what's the long tail of that, and what's the systemic and systematic changes that we're going to see? Well, the first is that we're seeing the rise of the head of D&I role. Here's some data just to show the percentage increase in that role. And you can see this as directly akin to where we went with digital 15 to 20 years ago, where organizations hired heads of digital into roles, but actually that was all about keeping up with how society was changing and becoming more digitally native. So we've got these roles in place, and actually what's then the fallout, and what's the impact that people in these roles, and many of whom might be watching this today, can actually have? Well, what we're seeing and hearing is potentially the resource and infrastructure around these roles is still being created. And there's a sense of professionalization that's needed around the world of D&I, so that it really does become about systems change, organizational shifts that of course take time. We run a news service here at The Unmistakable where we gather the latest news around D&I and work with our clients to help them feel more informed. And here are just 3 articles that we've seen over the last week. The top left, you see, to build a DEI program that works, you need metrics. This is absolutely key for this agenda to move forward, having the right metrics that allow people to move and allow people to measure what gets done to move forward. In the top right, I believe this report came out this week around this great breakup and an exploration into why women leaders are leaving companies at higher rates than men. But then also men are leaving the workforce. And we're seeing that that's more due to mental health, whereas for women, it's childcare. So there's something happening, and perhaps you've heard that already today, in how workplaces are actually evolving, and are they adjusting and adapting in a way that's quick enough given all of the confusion and change that we're living through. So you might be looking at that and saying, well, okay, the big picture is vast and it's wide, but what does that then mean for me, and what can I do? So there's a couple of things. When we look at what's needed inside, and that's both inside your organization and inside yourself as an individual, there's a couple of references and tools that might be interesting for you here. So the first is the Donella Meadows project, which is a space-time graph. And it looks at what are people's perspectives on. So at the bottom, you've got time. So next week, all the way through to my children's lifetime. And on the right-hand side, you've got space. So am I thinking about my family and my immediate circle? or am I thinking about the world? And what you see here is that there's a clustering of where people spend their perspectives and time, which is really around what's going on in the immediate future around those around me. But actually, we need to expand out and really think beyond. So people who work in global organizations quite often look at what's going on more within my business, within the world, because you're having conversations more often on that level. But then are we thinking beyond our own lives? And I think given the confusion and the contracting of everything that's going on, we are looking more short term because COVID and the world changes are telling us, and particularly businesses, were planning cycles that were as long as they were before being shrunk. So it's an invitation for anyone here to just be thinking, well, what am I thinking about and who am I thinking about and for how long? And actually what perspectives might I need to bring in that are outside of my network, outside of my characteristic, outside of who I am today. The other bit is around bias. So thinking about the different areas of bias, there's a very good resource by the Visual Capitalist here. If you Google 50 types of bias, it's a great one to use with teams to think about what kind of biases might I be holding. And this is something we do a fair amount with leadership teams, with management teams, to think about what are we holding and what impact does that have. For anyone who's a fan or proponent of bias, you'll probably know Pragya Agarwal's book Sway, where she really deconstructs the elements of bias and the misnomer that we can one day train ourselves away and suggest that we might never have bias. But actually, we need to become aware of what we're holding and then how that's playing through. So what we see, for example, is it plays through in many decisions of who am I looking at across a hiring table and who am I bringing in to who am I then promoting. There's a lot being written at the moment around the glass cliff and how people from underrepresented groups are being put into leadership positions, are being put into places of authority and power, but not being set up to succeed. We might look to the government at the moment to see how that's playing out. And these are all elements that factor into who we are and how we work and what's going on for us, both inside us as individuals and inside organizations. And there's now an opportunity to break beyond that and look at what kind of team do we want to be? How do we want to lead our organizations? And how are we going to do that in a way that's going to be more inclusive? And that inside part is really key because I think so much focus around that, led by people teams, forward-thinking HR individuals, forward-thinking CEOs, thinking how do we really walk the talk that we want to create? But what is the talk? And actually, how do we showcase this on the outside? As you heard, my background in marketing comms and having led the comms for something like Pride in London has given me a really acute understanding of how communications plays out, both within underrepresented groups, but then how that plays out into a mainstream environment. So what is needed on the outside? What I wanted to show you here is a snapshot of the type of work that we also do here at the Unmistakable beyond the culture building work, which is really working with marketing teams, their agencies, to think through how do we showcase inclusivity and diversity out in the world. There's one school of thought that says it's all about casting and who we show in adverts, and there has been a real shift in that over the last couple of years. But actually, a lot of it is about the depth and the storytelling opportunities that you have within marketing. So if you're in the UK, you may have seen this advert by Tesco and their ad agency BBH, who we worked with this year, to look at how do you represent the Muslim community when it comes to something like Ramadan. Now, historically, Ramadan would be marked by supermarkets, by product shots and advertising around different types of products that might be on sale during the month, a month where for 29 to 30 days, the Muslim community fast from sunrise to sunset. And that is an opportunity which is as big as, for example, Christmas is for the Christian community, is a big moment for Muslims. But for advertisers and their marketing teams who may not have Muslims within their team or may not have the cultural confidence and understanding, there's an opportunity to build that and build it in a way that allows people to create better work. So we partnered with BBH and Tesco and looked at every single detail around this campaign. So from the very insight of what were we trying to do, we were trying to actually showcase and bring in Muslims into the process. So that played through in the team that was behind the scenes, creating this shot. And what you can see here on the right-hand side is a shot of empty plates. And as the sun set, the plates would fill up with food. So we brought in a Muslim photographer, we brought in a chef, we had a consultant from our team, all there on the shoot, helping to make that happen and helping to make that as authentic as it could be. And then we really looked at the details of how did that look? How did it play out? Did it feel like it would in the Muslim household? And this is where you're really bringing that inside of building a strong culture and the ability to have conversations in a psychologically safe way into the work. And then the playthrough was a work of art, which was the video that then transitioned and showed the food and was widely acclaimed, both by the advertising industry, but particularly within Muslim communities who said that they felt seen. And that wasn't just Muslim potential consumers, but a lot of Muslim colleagues within Tesco who, in the context of the job market, saying, I'm so pleased and glad that I work for a supermarket and a company that understands me and puts this kind of effort and energy into it. And that's why clearing that confusion that I talked about at the beginning and really looking into who are we inside and internally, both as people, teams, and companies, and how do we translate that in a nuanced and accurate way externally is really where the future needs to go when it comes to D&I. So with that, if you're curious about what we do at the Unmistakable, there's a few ways to get in contact. Happy to pause for questions, but I'm fairly sure that I'm about to hit my time. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much, Asad. It was great to hear your insights and really fascinating. I'll just share, I think the UK is one of the most advanced countries in terms of D&I from what I've seen. And I think, you're already measuring it. You're doing great work there. So it's great to be able to, for you to be able to share your work on a global platform here like this as well.
Thanks so much.